Now, there's been quite a bit of critical commentary in the Indian media about what happened just after India's independence in relation to, the Security Council seat. There is a commentary that India actually batted for China rather than batting for itself, and the subsequent Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, Panchashil Agreement, and others by Mr. Nehru were basically completely rebuffed, resulting in the 1962 bloody war. So, do you think the political leaders of India just after independence committed some historical blunders that has led us to this situation?
Several blunders were made by the post-independence leadership. This was a direct consequence of Prime Minister Nehru running the country's foreign policy and not paying any heed to other counter viewpoints that were at that time outlined by some very powerful Congress party leaders and in the opposition. So there is no doubt that India championing China's case for UN Security Council membership even after the 1962 war. International relations are based on the principle of reciprocity, give and take. It was, from India's perspective, it was all give, nothing in return from China.
Historically, there is no evidence to suggest that India was given a United Nations Security Council membership on a platter and India turned it down. There was never such an offer. There's a lot of false narratives that have been built that the United States offered Security Council membership to India, but Nehru gave it to China. That is absolutely wrong. China, of course, the Republic of China was one of the founding members of the United Nations Security Council. The Republic of China, which is Chiang Kai-shek's China, became a member of the United Nations, and the United States at the time, which was obviously instrumental in the creation of the United Nations, saw China, Chiang Kai-shek's China at the time, as the only real partner in Asia. Japan, of course, was an enemy. Japan had been defeated in 1945. India was still a British colony. And if Britain was going to be a permanent member of the Security Council, there was no room for India at that time. And Chiang Kai-shek's China was United States ally. And United States therefore chose China, the Republic of China, to be a permanent member of the Security Council. Of course, after 1949, when the Communist Party came to power, the Republic of China moved to Taiwan, and it was a much smaller entity. And it continued to occupy that position in the Security Council as China's true representative. But of course, by the 1950s, it became very clear that there was no chance of Chiang Kai-shek ever taking over China again, and that the communist government was there to stay. And by 1971, China was readmitted. China was admitted to the United Nations. In other words, China was always there, but earlier the United Nations had recognized Republic of China. In 1971, it kicked Taiwan out, and it accepted that the People's Republic of China was the real China, and it gave that membership to China. So historically, really, there was never any, an offer on a platter to India that, okay, here it is, a permanent, Security Council membership that you can take. Yes, it is true that Prime Minister Nehru he championed, India under Prime Minister Nehru championed that China's seat at the United Nations should be given to the People's Republic of China, to Communist China. He did maintain that position on a matter of principle. On a matter of principle that China was the government which was recognized by most governments, most of the developing countries, of course, recognized People's Republic of China, and India was one of the first countries to recognize the communist government in Beijing. So Prime Minister Nehru maintained that China was the legitimate government, or the Communist Party government was the legitimate government of China, and therefore People's Republic of China was the legitimate, power for China.
So, do you think India will ever get the, permanent membership of the UN Security Council? something that it's rightly due?
I wrote an article in World Policy Journal in 2000. I said that the sole obstacle to UN Security Council reforms is now China. And that was almost 20 years ago. And that's now everybody is talking about it. That yes, it's not the US anymore. It's not Russia. It's not France and Britain. China does not want the UN Security Council to be expanded to include India. So I do not believe that UN Security Council is going to be reformed in the near future. International institutions, if they do not reform themselves, they fall by the wayside. That's what happened to the League of Nations. Or a cataclysmic event takes place, a major power conflict that leads to the formation of new institutions. Short of a major event that leads to change in China's relations with India, I do not believe that China would want to see another Asian power becoming a permanent member of the UN Security Council.
The Modi government has indeed taken several measures in that regard, whether it is vaccine diplomacy, saving people from conflict zones around the world, batting for climate change accord and so on. And particularly being the leader of the global South, admitting, Africa into G20 and so on. So, do you think we are on the path to secure the support of the at least developing world to get a seat in the Security Council at the United Nations?
Well, ultimately, and perhaps unfortunately, to get a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, there are only 5 countries that really matter. So you need to get obviously it's important to rally the rest of the world around India's ambition to have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. But it's the 5 permanent members that really count, and we have support from 4 of those 5 permanent members. So I think the key challenge here is, what is China's position? And I think that is, as I referred to earlier, I think increasingly we will see the bilateral relationship and frictions in the bilateral relationship play out on issues of global governance. So we've seen, for instance, not only has China not supported India's permanent seat on the UN Security Council, President Xi Jinping did not attend the G20 summit in New Delhi last year. There's been frictions on issues of debt restructuring, for instance, with respect to Sri Lanka. Even on climate negotiations, which were once an area of cooperation and convergence, they're increasingly pursuing divergent positions. So I think that is going to be a key challenge facing India as it seeks to emerge as a regional and global power and emerge as a voice of the global South, because you have a key country challenging India's ambitions, and that is China. Whether it be its permanent seat on the UN Security Council or its ambitions to play the role of the leader or voice of the global South.
Our question, therefore, is, how much longer? How much longer will the will of 5 members continue to override the collective voice of 188 member states? This must change. My second point, redressing centuries of injustice. Co-chairs, I think we might all broadly agree that the historical injustices perpetrated against the global South can no longer be ignored. And it is time to rectify these disparities by ensuring greater representation for regions like Asia, Latin America, and Africa on the United Nations Security Council, through a reform in both its categories, permanent and non-permanent. Indeed, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. My third point, the Indian example where bold leadership can lead to change. The inclusion of the African Union as a full member of the G20 during India's presidency serves as a powerful testament to the transformative power of political will. India's proactive stance underscores that where there is determination, there is a path to meaningful reform that will ensure equity.
Now, there is no doubt that the institutions that were established, at the end of Second World War, including the United Nations, have basically outlived their utility, and the format that they are in at the moment is really not reflective of the current reality of the 21st century. So Mr. Modi is known for out-of-the-box thinking, out-of-the-box action, at least in domestic politics. Do you think he will pull a rabbit out of his hat and maybe try to establish an alternate structure to United Nations going forward?
I don't think that we would see an alternative to the United Nations necessarily, but I think what we are seeing is more ad hoc issue-based initiatives that are emerging. So whether it be the Mineral Security Partnership on the issue of critical minerals, or the Artemis Accords, which is on the governance of space, or the Quad, which is addressing several issues ranging from maritime security to supply chain resilience. I think we are seeing these, what is sometimes referred to as mini-laterals initiatives that are emerging between like-minded countries, more value-driven initiatives. So, the Quad, for instance, are Asia's 4 key maritime democracies: Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. So I think that is a sign of things to come. And of course, it's not just India that is pushing these initiatives, but the China as well. So the BRICS, for instance, its Belt and Road Initiative, and I think these are also pushing alternative models of global governance that are essentially challenging the Bretton Woods system. It's interesting in the case of the BRICS, or the expanded BRICS, that India is also a member, and it's one of the initiatives that's being pushed by the BRICS is the de-dollarization of bilateral trade, both as a means of encouraging trade in your own currency, so whether it be the rupee or the renminbi, but also as a means to potentially evade Western sanctions or punitive measures that are used, or we've seen it particularly being used in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I think, I think it is definitely a sign of way to come, and we are going to see a growing spaghetti bowl of regional and global initiatives as we see that the established forms, the Bretton Woods institutions, are increasingly challenged or seen to be out of sync with the global balance of power.